So today we're going to look at the age of exploration and the beginnings of the conquest of the New World, the Americas, which we need to think of as a time period that played out in the context of several overlapping changes and events, including the reconquest of Spain when Catholic monarchs began to retake Spain from people they considered to be infidels and heretics like Jews and Muslims, the Crusades, holy wars similarly fought by Catholics against people they considered to be heretics, the plague reappearing in Europe in waves, and then just before and then playing out during the Renaissance, a time period when Europe rediscovered a lot of its ancient learning and culture and began to kind of crawl itself out of the Middle Ages. It's also one of those topics that people feel like they know already, and so they try not to think about it. But I urge you to think critically about it, because this is one of those topics that, especially in the United States, people learn since they're little bitty. And so it just kind of becomes facts in your brain that you don't really think critically about. But when you apply a little bit of critical thought to these events, they start to look a little different than we learn them. So, starting off with a scenario to put you in the right mindset for really thinking through, especially the motivations for exploration, God, gold, and glory, critically. So, picture yourself here. You've decided that you're going to leave everyone you know and love behind, maybe forever, and you're going to bet your fate on the strength of a wooden boat that you will set sail on into a vast, dark, unknown, and violent ocean, heading in a direction that no one before you that you know of has ever taken. You have a bunch of men with you. You've promised them riches, but as soon as they get hungry, they might turn on you, because these are sailors, and sailors are pretty tough. If they're mad, they're not just going to kill you, they're going to take their anger out on you and make it hurt first. Also, they smell awful, and there's no getting away from them on a boat. You're going to sleep in deck because you need most of the inside part of the boat to store food. The deck is wet. Foods that can't spoil, that has little nutritional content, that's probably going to be half moldy and rat infested in short order, is all you have to look forward to eat. Even if you get where you're going, and it's a big if, you have to make the same trip back. The trip is going to take months. Think about yourself personally. What would motivate you, really, for real, to want to do this? Think of like a dollar amount. If you can't think of anything that would make you personally want to do such a thing, what kinds of temptations do you think are strong enough to motivate others? And here, I urge you to actually give an honest answer. The temptation is to recite the answer that you've been taught, right? God, gold, and glory. But like, what amount of money would it actually take for you personally to do this? Or how bad would your life have to be in order for you to want to take a trip on one of these ships? Go ahead and drop your dollar amount in the chat if you are in a live class right now. The reason I'm having you think about things this way is because it's important in history and in life to think critically about why people do things and why people say they do things. Often they're different. I've been teaching this class for at least 8 years, and nobody has ever answered that first question with, I would go on this terrifying, dangerous trip to benefit the people that I happen to meet on the other end, or to spread religion. Usually it takes like a good amount of money. And there's like always some handful of people who are legitimately motivated by making a name for themselves, becoming famous. Usually people cite reasons that have to do with a direct benefit to themselves, and for good reason. It sounds scary and awful. It would take millions of dollars for me to want to do that too. So apply the same line of reasoning when you're learning about history and why people do what they do. It can be useful to think about causes for people's actions in two different categories, actually. First, material reasons, which are tangible, concrete benefits, usually economic or having to do with status and power. Think who benefits. For example, when Rome as an empire decided to expand, it wasn't out of the goodness of its heart that it conquered and killed a bunch of people and took their land. It expanded to get resources for itself and to be able to pay soldiers and generals from the spoils. The Arab Empire, also an empire we've learned about, expanded to get resources, like most do. And the Crusades were a complicated event because they're always talked about in terms of being a holy war to, satisfy God and do the right thing for Christianity. But actually, if you look a little bit more deep, the Pope also wanted more power and riches from the East, and the Crusaders themselves wanted to improve their material lifestyle. Material reasons aren't always the only reason that people do things, but it's usually a driving force, and it's usually the part that people don't talk about themselves. Usually, when people are talking about things they've done, they tend to refer to a second category of causes or reasons to do things, ideological reasons, which are ideas tied to values and morals that make actions that otherwise might seem just violent and greedy seem kind of good, maybe right, maybe even necessary. To take the Roman example, Romans didn't tell themselves that they were just killing people and taking their stuff. Romans claimed that they were spreading the benefits of Roman citizenship and civilization to conquered territories. How nice of them, right? The Arab Empire, in terms of ideology, initially formed to protect and expand Islam. And the Crusades, as we've recently learned, involved fighters believing that they were doing God's work and would go to heaven if they fought these wars. Ideological reasons are usually what people will give you when they talk about their own choices. And you can apply this not just in history, but in life. Take me, for example. I'm a teacher. I teach history because I legitimately think that the world would be a better place if more people understood history on a deep level. That's my ideological reason for teaching this class. But if I'm being honest, that reason doesn't get me out of bed every single morning. I need a paycheck too. So the material reason that I have for doing what I'm doing right now is money. I need a paycheck. And if I'm being really honest, without that paycheck, I don't know that I would be waking up at 6 in the morning every morning to teach a class. Usually you need both material and ideological reasons to motivate people for anything, violent stuff and everyday stuff. And usually, if you start to pay attention, people only advertise their ideological motivations. They sound nicer. So we're going to apply this to the story of God, Gold, and Glory, which you will claim to know backwards and forwards already, right? After the Crusades, European explorers like Columbus were motivated to embark on exploration by the idea that they could go tap into the networks of the Indian Ocean to gain glory, please God, and make money. The Crusades had made Europeans aware of a ton of wealth being generated through the Indian Ocean trade. Italian merchants who originally transported Crusaders from Europe to the Middle East began bringing back luxury items like spices, silk, gold, jewelry, perfumes, etc. And the increased demand for luxury items like these spurred trade. Italian merchants began to act as middlemen, trading items between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. And it was at this point in the story, throughout the 1400s, that a new nomadic group rose to power and became one of the most powerful empires in the world for the following 400 years. It was called the Ottoman Empire. They were a Turkish group from Central Asia, and they established a power base in Turkey, which is like right here. It used to be called Asia Minor in history. Constantinople, which you've heard of, is here. It's now called Istanbul. They eventually conquered the Middle East, North Africa, and the Byzantine Empire, and were the only group to successfully conquer Constantinople. And as you'll notice, they are blocking Europe, which is over here, from the Indian spice trade, which would have been off in this direction. So, Europeans needed to find a way to get here to the Indian spice trade networks without going the obvious route through land here. Following the rise of the Ottoman Empire, merchants throughout Europe sought a new trading route that would give them access to the Indian Ocean without having to pay the taxes demanded by the Ottomans. The race was on. After all, the first explorer to find this much desired route would not only likely become very wealthy, but they would become famous throughout Europe for their discovery. Kings and queens of various European countries competed with one another by sponsoring or paying for these journeys. They wanted to bring glory to their country, in addition to controlling the trade routes, which would have brought a ton of money. Because of this, explorers from around Europe risked everything, venturing into unknown waters in the hopes of a historic breakthrough. Vasco da Gama from Portugal struck first by becoming the first European explorer to successfully sail around the southern tip of Africa, gaining access to the Indian Ocean along Africa's east coast, like over here. Not to be outdone, Spain sponsored Christopher Columbus in his attempt to sail west across from the Atlantic Ocean, hoping to reach the Indian Ocean from the Asian side. So, while Vasco da Gama went this way through Africa, Columbus intended to go this way, having no idea that there was a giant landmass here that was already populated by civilizations, for what it's worth. So we arrive at our key points. This is what should be in your notebooks. During the Age of Exploration, European explorers looked for ways to tap into the Indian Ocean trade networks to make money on the spice trade. They didn't figure out how to do this on their own. These explorers benefited from knowledge involving navigation and technology that came from Arab and Asian civilizations that made transoceanic exploration possible, like the compass, better maps, better ship design, and so forth. Their motivations are typically taught in terms of the 3 Gs, God, Gold, and Glory, but we're going to complicate that by thinking a little bit more critically about what each of them mean. First, let's talk about their material reasons, the benefits to the explorers themselves that are tangible, concrete, usually economic. Those are gold and glory. By gold, we mean getting access to Indian Ocean Trade Network money at first. And then once they found the New World, the Americas, literally getting gold. Not that there was much to be had. Second, glory. By glory, we don't just mean fame. In an era with very limited social mobility, the benefits of exploration offered a way up the social hierarchy to people who otherwise might never have one. The Black Death and the end of feudalism had opened up the possibility to move up in society. This is called social mobility. And the possibility of becoming noble or upper class, meaning commoners, people lower on the social hierarchy, could maybe be treated like the upper class. This doesn't happen often in history in terms of an opportunity to jump up the ladder, and it drove a lot of people to seek their fortune in exploration. Plus, people, then as now, tend to like glory and fame. So, by glory, we mean a way up the social hierarchy. Separate from that, we have the ideological reason, or the justification, the idea tied to values and morals that made these people able to sleep at night thinking that they were doing a good thing once they started conquering and killing a bunch of people. And that would be the third G, God, by which is meant spreading Christianity. The duty to convert the quote-unquote infidels had been part of European Christianity since before the Crusades. Spreading Christianity was a real motivator for these people who saw it as part of the struggle between civilization, by which they meant Christians, and barbarism, by which they meant everyone else. And here you have to remember the internal logic of this thought that came from the Inquisition. If you really truly believe that non-Christians are going to go to hell, and you believe that hell is a very, very real, really terrible place, it could come to seem like a moral duty to convert people, or at least quiet people who are dissenting, who shed doubt upon your religious beliefs. Columbus's voyages, remember, took place in the context of the reconquest of Spain, which was a centuries-long process of Catholic kingdoms reclaiming Spain from the infidels that lived there before, Jews, Muslims, either exiling them or killing them, or, a little both. This religious mission provided a justification for many of the violent actions such explorers would take with the native populations they encountered. And it's important to remember that this motivation alone probably wouldn't have gotten people out of bed and into situations of great risk. So even though you hear about it a lot, the desire to spread Christianity, it's important not to just take that for these people's word and believe that they really were just totally charitable. there was something in it for them too, and in history and in life, it's important to remember both. So, pause the video here, capture all of this in your notes. And if you're in my live class right now, drop your comment for the day in the group chat. What was interesting? What questions do you have? What don't you understand and want to be explained further? What do you want to know? What are you curious about? And what connections can you make? Then press play again, because the next part of this video is going to take you through independent classwork reading sources. Okay, so with your notes all done and our class discussion wrapped up, we're going to look a little bit more deeply at the ideological justification part of the story. If you're reading a reading packet, these are source A and source B, and directions are up on the slide. I'm also going to take this opportunity given to us by the COVID craziness to read you the text, so you can also just listen and answer questions on the back end. In these sources, we're going to think about how violence towards non-Christians was justified. And then for our bigger question for the week, was Columbus a product of his time? And if so, does that let him off the hook for his actions in the New World? Our first source comes from a book called Heretics and Heroes by Thomas Cahill. And in it, we're going to describe what Catholicism meant in Spain in the years leading up to Columbus's trip. So like the context. The topic discussed will be God, the conquest of the Americas in the context of the Spanish Reconquista. And guiding questions. So like think about these things while we're going through the source. This is like an adult book. It's not a high school textbook. So if you don't understand every little thing, it's really not the end of the world. Just try to get what you can from it and see what grabs your interest. Think about in particular, are people in their moralities shaped by society? Or is there a universal standard of right and wrong that all people deep down know to be true and should adhere to? Was Columbus just a product of his society, or was he actually a bad person? So I'm going to start reading, and when I need to, I'll stop and explain. The year 1492 was a busy one for the Catholic monarchs. Beside their conquest of the Moorish or Muslim kingdoms of Granada, which was a part of Spain, they'd begun to take considerable interest in the religious observances of their subjects. They felt that false doctrines or false beliefs should be checked, and that those who dared espouse such doctrines should be punished by the civil power in union with the church. So the state should be punishing these people in addition to the church. They issued the Alhambra decree, expelling all unconverted Jews from Spain. As we have already seen in the case of the Black Death, communities of Jews made convenient scapegoats in difficult times. But by this point, Jews had been living among European Christians for the better part of a millennium and a half, which is 1,500 years. Often and easily, sometimes appreciated for their special skills, sometimes targeted for elimination. In general, insofar as Christians thought about them at all, Jews tended to be considered flawed or partial Christians, believer in the Old Testament, but not the New, people who, inexplicably, failed to see that Jesus was the fulfillment of all their prophecies. They were not universally hated, as were the Muslims, called Moors, or more ominously the Saracens. Those who had cooked up a new religion, really a heresy, and stolen the holy places from the rightful owners, the Christians, which is what the Christians thought at the time. Selectively admired or merely tolerated, Jews were an expected part of the European social scene. The expulsion from Spain, however, was not their first. If the Spanish expulsion seems particularly harsh on account of the huge numbers involved and the efficiency with which results were pursued, it only signaled more execrable banishments to come, so more horrible things in the future. By the end of the Second World War, Ireland would stand out as the only European nation that had never expelled and/or attempted to eliminate its Jews nor subjected them to pogroms, nor confined them to ghettos. However, Spain's was almost certainly the earliest of these European persecutions, and a characteristically Spanish one. The offer, laid out by the Archbishop of Toledo in 694, that all Spanish Jews choose between baptism and perpetual enslavement. Nor should we forget that in 1391, the newly crowned Spanish king Henry III encouraged the massacres of Jews in Seville, Cordoba, Toledo, and other cities of his realm. Spanish Jews were given exactly 4 months from the date of the Alhambra decree to clear out of the extensive realms of the Catholic monarchs, not an easy feat for most to perform. Moreover, though departing Jews were graciously allowed to take their belongings with them, they were not allowed to take any gold or silver or minted money. So they had to leave and they couldn't take anything of value. Remember, the monarchs were experiencing an extreme cash flow crisis at this time too. The punishment for failing to depart or convert was death. The punishment for Christians who attempted to hide Jews was confiscation of all property and cancellation of all hereditary privileges. So it is hardly surprising that many Jews publicly converted to Christianity and were baptized. These conversos, as they were called, elicited suspicion from their Christian neighbors. Were their conversions sincere or merely convenient? As many were subsequently discovered to have continued their practice of Jewish religious customs, Spaniards found themselves devising bizarre tests of Christian orthodoxy, such as forcing suspects to eat pork. So in other words, there was doubt about the Jews who had converted to Christianity if they'd actually really converted. And one of the ways of testing it was to force them to eat pork, because if you were Jewish, that was against your religion. If you refused or gagged, you must be an insincere convert. Converts from Islam would soon be subjected to the same test. The expulsion of unconverted Jews from Spanish territory was, however, but one prong of a campaign of increasingly cruel exactions on the part of the Catholic monarchs. The monarchs soon began to hound unconverted Muslims, as well as those Moriscos or Little Moors who only outwardly accepted Christianity in a fashion similar to their persecution of the Jews. As early as 1478, the monarchs had set up a new institution to ensure unity of faith throughout their realms, the Spanish Inquisition. Throughout the Middle Ages, there had been inquisitions arranged by the Pope in concert with local bishops. These had, however, only a very occasional impact on medieval life, functioning locally, operating with some highly specified object. That is, the rooting out of a particular Christian heresy in a particular place. The popes, who directed inquiries into heresy from afar, were normally more interested in convincing the heretics of the error of their ways than in burning them alive. Only unrepentant holdouts were put to the torch. The Spanish Inquisition, which is an inquiry answerable to the Spanish monarchs rather than to the Pope in Rome, was an innovation significantly larger in scale and cruelty. The scariest thing about it was its omnicompetence, the broadness of its mandate, its freedom to look into anything and anyone for any reason. The monarchs had been encouraged to set up their own national inquiry into heresy among their subjects by Isabella's personal confessor, Torquemada, who became an essential figure in the monarch's self-conscious reconquista, the reconquest of Spain, culturally reclaiming it from its centuries of Muslim rule, during which Muslims, Jews, and Christians had lived side by side in a fondly remembered convivencia, and had even collaborated with one another in preserving and translated seminally important religious and philosophical texts. So this was the golden age of the Arab Empire in Cordoba, which we studied in previous units. Torquemada, hostile to any text from which he thought he could sniff a whiff of heresy, enthusiastically promoted the burning of Hebrew and Arabic books. But what he became most famous for was his enthusiastic burning of human beings, probably close to 2,000 individuals in the course of his 15-year tenure as Spain's Grand Inquisitor. Besides the public burnings, carried out with great solemnity as acts of faith, the numbers of those he ordered tortured were, according even to the Catholic Encyclopedia, vast, and on an unprecedented scale. Exceptionally intolerant even for his times, the entry continues, he established an exceedingly efficient spiritual police system that would continue to terrorize Spain for centuries, to be abolished only in 1834. Its official work was to investigate heresy among Christians, but it marched far beyond that mandate, investigating and punishing a wide variety of spiritual offenders, from so-called crypto-Jews to supposed witches, to those accused of sexual crimes like sodomy and bestiality. It would be dismayingly reductive, however, if we were to attribute Torquemada's success only to the craven fear he struck in the hearts of men and women. The Inquisitor's insistence on shared universal belief expresses a yearning that may also be found in the human heart, a desire to be united unequivocally in a communal and harmonious ant-heap. This need for universal unity of mankind against dissenters certainly appears and reappears through history, and its impact on human affairs should never be underestimated. But besides this profound reality of hidden motivations, this quest for universality of belief, it must be said that many participants in witch hunts are simply disgruntled, jealous partisans in search of retribution against their betters. This provides the context for Columbus's departure from the coast of Spain in 3 ships, the caravels Nina, Pinta, and the larger carrack Santa Maria, headed for the unknown in 1492. Pause here and answer the following questions, either in your notebooks or typed in your OneNotes. What was the Reconquista and the Spanish Inquisition like? How might living in such an environment shape the way Europeans viewed non-Catholics? And how might the background of the Reconquista in Spain help explain explorers' treatment of the natives in the New World? Source B is a primary source from the time, the Spanish requirement of 1513, which was read to natives in the New World by Spain. It's an example of how God was used as a justification in the New World. Topics discussed in this article include how explorers justified their actions, and what you should think about when you're reading this source includes: when people go and conquer new lands, they usually have a material reason, money, and an ideological, moral-sounding reason. Which do you think drives their actions? Can ideology alone explain it? Was God a motivation to explore, or a justification for actions that people would otherwise know to be wrong and immoral? And if the explorers sincerely believed in the justness of their mission, can their actions, no matter how cruel, be considered morally wrong? So, the Spanish requirement of 1513 read to the natives. Within 15 years of Columbus's first voyage, the Spaniards who continued to cross the Atlantic in search of new lands to subdue had worked out to their own satisfaction a little ritual for assuaging whatever dim objections their strangled consciences might have voiced about these adventures in exploitation. Typically, after discovering an island and encountering a tribe of Indians new to them in the Americas, the Spaniards would read aloud, in Spanish, what came to be called the requirement. Here is one version. I implore you to recognize the Church as a lady, and in the name of the Pope, take the King as Lord of this land, and obey his mandates. If you do not do it, I tell you that with the help of God, I will enter powerfully against you all. I will make war everywhere and every way that I can. I will subject you to the yoke and obedience to the Church and to His Majesty. I will take your women and children and make them slaves. The deaths and injuries that you will receive from here on will be your own fault, and not that of His Majesty, nor of the gentlemen that accompany me. What were the illiterate natives half a world away from Europe to make of it? Or to make of the supposed rights of the Spanish monarchs who had been assigned their lordship by the Pope? The native peoples had never even heard of such roles, They knew nothing of the histories and cultures of Europe, Africa, or Asia. They knew nothing even of the existence of these vast other worlds. And in any case, el requerimiento, as it was called, was usually read to them without translation in Castilian, which none of them understood. What was important to the Spaniards was that all legal requirements had now been fulfilled for their utter usurpation of native rights. Pause the video here and answer the following. How is God used as a justification for conquistadors' actions in the New World? And how did the Reconquista, or the Spanish Inquisition, help shape this worldview? We are building up to a discussion on Columbus, evaluating his role in history and how he should be remembered. Was he a hero or a villain? How should history remember Columbus? So you can answer the questions on the previous slide in context of these questions as well.